Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Every now and then we talk about checks on this show, and checks are becoming outdated. But I mentioned before, there's still a few things I do with checks, and also there's people who pay me by check. And in fact, a lot of cases I settle, the defendants pay me by check as well. So checks still exist, but they're becoming less and less common. You can go online and pay a lot of your bills online. And I've converted over to doing most of that online, but once in a while I will mail out a check. Now, if you watch the videos of mine all the way to the end and you see the end credits, you'll see in there I have a P.O. box, a post office box I go to where people send me stuff related to this show. Correspondence for Lehto's Law. So if I have a check to mail, I'll put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and I go to the post office and I actually put it through the wall. There's a slot in the wall, out of town mail. Put it through the slot, and then I go inside and do my business with the postmaster, who is somebody I actually know. It's a one-person post office. And so I know that when I put the mail through the slot, quite often she's on the other side, just takes it and throws it in whichever bin it's got to go into. But we've talked before about one of the perils of writing checks and mailing them is if someone gets a hold of that check before it gets where it's going, they can sometimes alter the check, and that's bad news for a lot of people. So, story out of Cincinnati, NBC5 WLWT, Todd Dykes wrote it. RJ sent it to me. Cincinnati medical student out thousands of dollars in mail theft case. Mail theft. A thief cashed a $1,400 rent check by altering it and making it payable for $16,000. And it cleared the banks. The person lost, instead of $1,400 to their landlord, $1,600 to a thief in Canada. So here we go. A second-year medical student at the University of Cincinnati remembers in sharp detail the moment her financial world flipped upside down. Just a normal weekend, put my check in the mail. I went to the post office and dropped it off in that blue box. So she put it in the box outside the building. That makes a difference here. Unfortunately for her, putting her February rent check in a mailbox at the post office next to Hyde Park Square was a fateful decision. She said, I wrote my check for $1,420. That's a month for rent. Everything seemed normal until a few weeks later. I woke up to a text from a landlord asking where my rent was. I checked my bank account and $16,000 was missing. As has recently happened to other people in greater Cincinnati, someone stole her check from a mailbox and cashed it for substantially more than the original amount. And I did a story not so long ago about somebody who stole a key from the post office. And it turns out those blue boxes that people drop their mail off in are opened by a key, and quite often one zip code will use the same key for every single box. So someone who has that key can steal stuff from all these boxes. Now, it's a federal offense for which you will get in a lot of trouble if you get caught doing that. But of course, there's a lot of stuff that can be in that mail of value. The frustrating part is that a lot of it was loan money. This is money that I'm supposed to be using for school, for expenses, for rent, and for food. So she took out student loans to get through medical school and had the money in the bank, and that's what that money was earmarked for. She shared a photo of a typical rent check she wrote last year and then showed a check of what the crook did to her payment. So apparently side by side, these two checks look so radically different that it's obvious that the $16,000 check was forged. She said it was just so clearly counterfeit. The handwriting is different. They forged everything about the check except for my signature. She's frustrated that the transaction didn't trigger some kind of alert. Complicating matters is the fact that the altered check was cashed by a bank in Canada. So someone actually went to the trouble of taking the check to Canada and cashing it there, presumably because that'll make it more complicated to unravel. Banks are aware that this is happening more often, with the mail in particular, says the director of communication for the Ohio Bankers League. Now, the woman whose check was stolen appreciates the growing awareness, but she's not convinced she'll ever get her money back. At first, I thought so, but as this is getting to be a longer and longer road, my hope is starting to wane a little bit. While saying she couldn't talk in absolute terms, the person from the Ohio Bankers League said that banks do their best to make accounts whole, but doing so can be a drawn-out process. She said stolen checks are not isolated to the Cincinnati area. Unfortunately, it's happening all over Ohio. She speaks to Ohio because, of course, she's the director of communication for the Ohio Bankers League. This is happening everywhere across America and probably elsewhere where checks are used. She said a push is on right now to encourage anyone who mails checks to take them inside their local post office, as Steve Lehto does, and hand them to a letter carrier, sort of like I do. She said that banks are also letting customers know they can usually pay bills using the internet, which removes the temptation of a handwritten check that can be forged. So you might ask, Steve, you're an attorney, are there laws involving banks and checks? Yes, there are. And ironically, because I talk about the Uniform Commercial Code from time to time, much of it is governed by the UCC, Article 4. Article 4. So people often hear me talk about Article 2, which is sale of goods, and Article 4 is a lot to do with how banks handle checks. And believe it or not, if someone forges a check of yours and the bank pays it, that's the bank's problem, not yours. But you got to straighten it out, so it becomes your problem, but the bank is on the hook for that. So the bank is supposed to be watching for stuff like this. But as you might imagine, they process so many checks so quickly that for them to catch every single one would take a while. In the old days, there actually was a person who would look at the check, and then, nowadays it's all being done by, stuff's being scanned and computers and so I don't even know if there's any humans involved in any of this unless somebody files a complaint. Interesting thing here is that the signature on the check wasn't forged, but the rest of the check was. But that makes the check just as bad as if it had a forged signature on it. And under the UCC, if you notify the bank that a check was forged or doctored like this, the bank has got to make it good with you, and then they got to go chase whoever they gave the money to. So that's why it's important for the bank to know who they're paying on a check. But the problem is that the UCC says that you've got to notify the bank within a reasonable amount of time, not to exceed 30 days. So they might say a reasonable amount of time is 25 days, 20 days, whatever it is. If you go look at the agreement you sign when you open up your checking account, it probably says in there, if you discover a problem, you've got so many days to tell us. And so for that purpose alone, even though I do write checks, which many people think means that I'm a Neanderthal, I do also have my bank accounts bookmarked on my computer, and so I can go in and look at them, and I do. I actually go and look at my bank accounts every single day because I'm paranoid. I'm an attorney. And part of my DNA now is I'm paranoid. And so once a day when I'm sitting at my desk, if I'm bored or I'm on hold or something, I will often just click, go into that bank account, click, go into that bank account, and just glance at it. Make sure nothing crazy's happened. And nothing crazy's happened in my bank accounts for quite some time, which I'm very glad about. But if a check I wrote for $1,400 suddenly showed up as being a check I wrote for $16,000, I'd spot it instantly. But I'm not blaming somebody who's not that vigilant because the odds of this happening are pretty slim. That's why it made the news. However, if you do write checks, you do need to check your account from time to time, especially, and I'll tell you right now, when I write important checks, like say to the IRS, I watch to see when they get cashed. Because if they don't get cashed, I might be in trouble. And when they do get cashed, I'm like, oh good, the check got cashed. And so one of the banks I'm with actually puts up a little notice on the front page and says, you have a check that cleared today or 2 checks that cleared yesterday, that kind of thing. And I actually had that notification pop up yesterday. I glanced at it to see which checks they were, and great, they cleared the proper amounts. They must have gone to the right place. And I checked that also. But the point is that if this happened to you, you have to find out about it, spot it, and report it to the bank and complain quickly. Because that's one of the things that the bank can hide behind is they can say, well, it happened, but because you didn't come back to us for 45 days, we can't go and find this person now. They probably could, but that's what they're going to say. And if the UCC says they've got 30 days or less and you take more than 30, well, then you got a problem. I also like to point out this bit about a check from Canada. I've mentioned before that every now and then I get these crazy emails saying, hey, do you handle cases in your area? And I used to mess with these people and say, yes, I do. I handle cases in my area. And next thing I know, somebody sends me a check and they say, that check is being sent to you on behalf of that person who contacted you. Take out a third and send 2/3 to them. Even though there's no retainer agreement, no lawsuit filed, no nothing. And I had this happen where someone FedExed me a check, and they FedExed it from Montreal, and it was a check made to look like it was drawn on the First Bank of Nova Scotia. And the funny part was that Nova Scotia was misspelled. The check was like $400,000. And the scam is they want me to put that in a trust account and then take the 2/3 of it that are not mine and mail them to somebody else who's in Canada. And of course, the check is no good. It's a counterfeit check. But how long will it take for the banks to, process this check? And sadly, there are law firms out there that have fallen for this. I've read the articles in the ABA Journal and elsewhere of law firms that actually thought, oh, we thought somebody actually was sending us a check because we were about to sue them. So we put it in our trust account that had a big pool of money in it, and we sent 2/3 of the check to somebody else who's gone now, and it turns out the check is no good. And so the bank comes back and says, guess what? You got to make good on all this money. And by the way, when you sent that money to those people, the check hadn't cleared yet, which means that you're actually sending money belonging to clients of yours, which is also a no-no. And so, word to the wise, and again, this is just the attorneys in my audience, and any attorney in my audience has been a solo practitioner for more than 3 minutes will know this. But when you handle money through a trust account, it's not yours, it's your client's. And if your client's going to pay you by giving you a slice of that, and you have an agreement that says they can do that, that's fine. But you can't pay them, nor can you pay yourself until that check clears, especially if there's money of other clients in there. Because if you do it before the check clears, technically speaking, you're paying out money that belongs to other people. And I know some people are going to say, Steve, money is so fungible, it's in a pot, you can't tell whose dollar belongs to who. Well, I can tell you that if this check didn't clear, it didn't belong to this check. We know that. And yes, in some states, the state bar will come after you for that and say, how are you writing checks to make payments on checks that haven't cleared yet? That's a problem. So the law firm that sent the money off to a scammer thinking they just got a windfall, not only did they get ripped off to the tune of all the money there they got to pay back, but they might have ethical issues with the bar coming in and saying, okay, let's explain this now. The money you sent to those scammers, whose was it? And you can't say it came from that bad check because that bad check never cleared. You gave someone else's money away. You did, and that's a problem. But this is a crazy story, but it's something we should learn from. The worst thing you can do is pay utility bills and so on by check, because those envelopes are very obviously utility bills, and then put them in your mailbox at the side of the road and put the flag up indicating outgoing mail. Because I've heard of people who drive around and they look for those flags and they run up really quickly and they grab the mail because they know there's a good chance there's a utility bill in there with a check in it. They grab the check, doctor the check up, and steal your money. So if you got to mail checks, take them to the post office. Otherwise, see if you can do it online. And yeah, checks are going to become an archaic technology if they're not already. But RJ, thanks for the story. Cincinnati medical student out thousands of dollars in mail theft case from WLWT.com, which is NBC5, Cincinnati. Todd Dykes wrote it. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Seen it all, done it all. Can't remember most of it.